Hello and welcome back to Exeter and Lara. You're watching part 5 of Back to the Start of It All series, and in this episode I'm going to show you how I've weathered this locomotive. Now I have covered weathering videos already, but there's a few more updated techniques that you see on this particular model. So I'm going to be showing you how I've done all those. Okay, so what we have here is class 45, and my plan with this is to use some of my original styles of weathering, but also add a few newer ones on here as well. So what I'm going to do is mask off some of the side parts of the body and do some interesting paint peel effects to the body sides rather than just the roof. Right, so what I've done is I've masked up most of the model, left areas exposed where I'm now going to go and spray these exposed areas using silver acrylic spray. I find the silver is perfect as when you think of the effects of peeling paint, it normally exposes the bare metal underneath, which obviously would probably be plated steel. So silver's perfect, so I'll get that done first, and I'll add all the weathering tones to those probably at the end. Okay, so I've given that a quick blast over with some silver, and for anyone who's interested in what silvers I use, I'll just pick up a few of these. Obviously this is varnish, but out in the shed I've got the silver. I don't suppose it really matters, but that'll do. So I'm going to get this masking tape off and then follow on with the next stages. Okay, so in terms of covering as much as I can in silver, I didn't want to go too mad with it. Got some of the key areas like underneath the vents and just an area on the roof as well on both sides. So happy with that. Gives me plenty of areas to sort of focus on to peel off the paint. What I've done is mixed up a small pot full of a mixture of acrylic rail match number 404. It's as close as a resemblance as what that probably could be. Not that it matters because I will be fading the whole lot down eventually. And obviously the mixture is done with the usual decal fix, and roughly do it 30% decal fix, so it's runny enough to probably apply 3 coats over the top, but not though it's too runny that you can't really get a decent effect of peeling from it. You get the idea. Is a good few coats will cover that nicely. So the thing is with using the decal fix mixture, sometimes it has a tendency of just displacing itself when you're trying to go over the acrylic sprays. I tend just to keep touching the areas in until it stays put as it begins to dry out slowly. Decal fix mixture dried fairly dark, probably too dark, as you can see around by the grill. So what I've done is I've just done a mixture of the acrylic and some white as well, just to tone it down, and then giving the whole lot of that just to coat over. There's no Decalfix mixture in that, it's just neat acrylic paint. At this stage the model itself isn't pretty, it looks a bit of a mess, but what I'm going to now do is show you how I do dry brushing. So I'm going to sort of give myself an even faded coat over all of this model, including the roof. So as I've got to do some acrylic mixing, what I'm going to do is I've got this old granite chopping board which was no longer required. This comes in handy because it's easy to clean, and everything that you put on there remains usable for a longer period of time, unless if you were mixing it up on paper it would dry too quick. So for dry brushing, all I'm going to do is just get a tone of blue, which I'm happy with, which to me looks like it's a shade down from the locomotive itself. Now the good thing with this is that you can actually use a mixture of shades, so if I wanted to I can just add like a bit of darker blue at that side and then just use the two tones together. So if I fancied a bit of lighter blue, then I can dry brush and then dip over onto that one and then add a slightly darker tone further along. Now dry brushing technique is a case of, as it says, is almost a dry brush. So it's to get as much of the paint back out of the brush as you possibly can. And with that dry brush, I'm just going to start the process of going over the whole of the bodywork. Completely toning down everything that's been done as well. I'll also go over all of this stuff that I've done with the Decalfix mixture as well, so everything's an even coat all the way across. Also as well, when you're doing the dry brushing, it will also, all like the bits of detail as well, it'll kind of highlight those as well. So things like the rivets around the steps all stands out nicely as well. So what I'm going to do, I think, is I'll come back and crack on with this, and then come back once the whole model's had its faded paint effect applied all over it. Okay, so there we go. Obviously at this stage it's not exactly pretty, as I've already said. Just going to make sure at this stage that I've got a wet cotton bud, and anything like the logos or the emblems, just to give those a bit of a clean up around them, as you obviously want to keep bits and pieces of detail like that exposed. So what I'm going to do now is to reveal the areas where we put the silver spray on, and to start creating the paint peel effect. Okay, so let's have a look at opening up the areas where we've got paint peel. So straight into thinners as always, and the areas where the paint peel was, I'm just going to soften those back up with thinners. And I've got some barbecue skewers, I'm just going to leave that for a few seconds, then come back in a minute. Okay, so let's see whether this works. And it does. Now I tend to just like to do random areas really. A few shut lines and places where there may be hinges and stuff like that, where you'd expect to see areas of paintwork sort of peeling off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crack on with creating these peeling effects over the whole bodywork in all the places where it was set up ready for that, and I'll show you the end results of that once that's done. So there we go. I haven't gone too mad with it, just a few random areas where you'd expect to see the paint blistering, sort of underneath the grills and around by sort of shut lines and stuff like that. Now what I'm going to do is give you a quick tip, because what I'm going to do is apply some rust tones to the actual metal work, so it's obviously just don't look like it's sheet metal straight underneath, and make it look like there's some degree of corrosion underneath. What you can potentially do is lay down the silver tones like I've done here at the beginning of the video, and then use the rust weathering powders and dab those over the top of the silver, obviously in a coat of varnish, then dab the powders on top of that, let them soak in, and then using a acrylic varnish is to spray over those weathering powders to lock those in, and then carry on with the Decal Fix mixture over the top, so when you come to peel off the paint like I've done here, you'll end up with the rust tones already in place. But as I wanted to do some of the areas of the actual pressed steel bodywork still showing through with a few spots of rust, I've done it this way. So I've prepared myself a small tray of my rust colours. I tend just to stick with the browns and the oranges. Just like to get them into the middle and then just blend the centre part of those. So I've initially got 3 different shades in there. So brush, I've just got a small one for dabbing on the powders, and we made a mess of the side there, never mind. And I also use the matte coat varnishes, and what I'm going to do is just use a nice brush and just get into all the areas where the metal work is, and just coat these areas up. And then with the weathering powders, I'm just going to set those straight into the wet varnish. Now again, as I said, I just wanted to do a few random places. It doesn't necessarily matter if you get anything else, the powders over any of the other body work for the time being. You can brush those off, or they will kind of work them into other places of the logo. Now a tip I like to do with this at the end, because I feel that the effect of that isn't that effective, is this is where the trick with the thinners comes into action, and just get rid of the varnish off of that. And what I tend to do is just with a loose brush of varnish, thinners, is just to dab that in, and it kind of disperses the powders out and make it look more like an actual rust rather than a heap of powder. Okay, so we zoom in a little bit, you can see obviously areas of the metalwork still showing through, lots of corrosion. Obviously the uses of thinners just gives the rust that sort of sense of depth, you know, that it's really corroding through the metal. So what I'm going to do is now I want to seal or let all this dry, let the varnish and the rust dry, and then I'm going to seal the whole model in either a gloss or a satin varnish, so all this lot now becomes permanent and it's all locked in before I move on to the next stages. So what I want to try and aim for is the effect of like the loco used to be really grimy at one time, and where it's been sat around, the bleaching of the sun and the rain etc. has washed most of the dirt and grime off into all the shut lines around the roof panels. Using again the marble slab and some Matco varnish, just going to add some of the colour from the powders I got there into that, and that should keep me going for most of the roof anyway. Then what I'm going to do is brush this over the roof. Now I'm going to leave this area where the rust and stuff is. I don't really want to put too much in the way of this shade around that area. So once I'm happy with that, what I'm going to do is grab a dusting brush and in some of the areas I'm just going to increase with some weathering powders. So I've gone over the roof panels with the powder and the paint mixture. What I'm going to do is I kind of want to now work all this into all the shut lines to make it look like the roof's grime's been washed away slowly. So going back into thinners and having a bit of tissue with me, I'm just going to push all the dirt and grime in one direction down the roof, getting as much of the grime into all the gutter lines. You can also use the fact that as this varnish is quite sticky and it's beginning to go off, you can just push the paint down to one side. So you end up with lots of areas where the grime's really ground into the paintwork, if that makes sense. So the idea of the powders along the shut lines was just to create the extra depth of dirt. So it looks like it's all run off the roof and it's caught up in the roof panels, and all the grime is built up in those areas. Another tip as well, just for removing some of the grime, is using a cotton bud. Try and use a reasonably decent quality one, otherwise you'll end up shedding a lot of fluff into the paintwork. And just to make sure that I've keep it dipped in the varnish as well, to keep the actual cotton from drying out. So they're the sort of style and techniques that I use on this. Basically for streaking, it's good to use the brush because you end up with that sort of grime streaking down. And I do the same what I've done on the roof with the body sides. I tend to use thinners for diluting this and pushing it down into the shut lines, but as I've got the sprayed varnish over the top, it'll probably strip back through that layer, so I'm avoiding the thinners on that for the time being. It's okay, just keep playing around with it until you're feeling that it's looking realistic and you're happy with it all. It's as good as that. So as an example, let's just catch that outside the light, and you'll see the effects that that's now created. Just on the fan panel is the sort of finish I'm trying to achieve over the roof. Now if you were kind of trying to base this on a model that had just recently been withdrawn from service, and a lot of these sort of locos and sidings, you'll still see all the grime from the exhaust ports, all the soot build up around the fan. More importantly, you can go back into a bit of black weathering powder. I tend not just to use black, I mix it with a slight bit of red in it. But try not to turn that into a brown, and then I'll just increase a few tones whilst the varnish is still sticky. The powders, just dabbing those in. Like so. So you see some areas where the exhaust build-up is. Okay, so just going to go into the rust colours, and everywhere where there's rust, just brush in the areas with the paint mixture. Leave that to dry for about a minute or so, just to go sticky. Same principle as the roof, and then come back and show you the next stages. Okay, using the varnish again, with a relatively clean brush, I'm just going to take off most of what's been put on. Always good just to keep the brush clean as well as you're going. Now what I'm going to do also is get some areas of rust just underneath where the signs are, because I'm going to, rather than try and remove the signs, I'm going to just cover those in rust. So there we go, with that in place it just gives the illusion that the rust is dripped down the bodywork. And always good to make sure that they're all vertical as well, so none of them are running at a slight angle. So all the vents and louvers, I just straight out into the matte coat varnish, no weathering powders mixed in with it, and just going to brush those into the louvers. So now that's done, what I'll do is I'll let that dry off slightly, so it's again probably a couple of minutes just to be so it's sticky. So again, just going back into the pot that I used on the roof, I'm just going to dab the powders into the sticky varnish. As an indication, I don't necessarily need to do the whole lot. So I'm just going to work in some of the darker tones as well, just along the bottom lines. Okay, so what I've done is I've just reduced the amount of paint that's in there, and also got myself some thinners. I'm just going to dab those into the grills, which will just soak into various areas. Just enabling me to push some of the paint and powders out to the outer edges of the actual grills themselves. So with that in mind, what I'll do now is, just as the thinners is obviously sitting inside the vents and I want to remove most of it, just get a cotton bud and then just roll it over the vents, and that will just pick up most of the loose thinners, and it'll also kind of pick up a lot of the paint off of the louvers as well. What I'm going to do is switch over now to some of the rust tones. And I'm just going to set some of the shading down the bottom of the louvers to sort of blend in with all the other rust in all the other areas. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I've got the darker pot, which is sort of made up of black and red, and I'm just going to dip that into some, so I've dabbed it into the pot and then into the matte coat varnish. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and highlight the roof line with a very fine brush, just bring that up. So as you can see, it's enhancing all the little bits of detail, and it sort of breaks up those areas. Really brings the model to life, this sort of part of it. Again, with the sign where it used to be, I've just covered that in rust, and just streak some of that rust down the body sides. Again, sort of getting all around the window frames, all these bits of areas where there's like little rivets down the bottom, all that sort of stuff. As you blend those in, they begin to stand out more. Okay, so typically along the front of most warning panels on locomotives that have been in scrapyards is they tend to suffer from a lot of rust areas, a lot of fading paintwork. And I think most of the time a lot of the grime's already sort of been washed off. So this is the usual mixture of rust tones. And what I like to do with this is to start from a lighter tone and then work my way up to the darker ones. So what I'm going to do now is just with the same brush, just go into the darker shades of brown and pop those in random places. And then I'm going to leave that until it's virtually dry. Okay, so that's virtually dry, and just back into the varnish again on a clean brush. I'm just going to liven it back up again. And this should break the paint back down again, and then I can just brush it down to clear most of it off. And again, just making sure you've got cotton buds to hand. You can use those just as a helping hand also. So that's basically the effect that you're after. You've got a few spots and you've created. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just get the undersides prepared, ready for weathering. I'm just going to dry brush over that with white. So this is just done to just enhance obviously the detail along the bottom of the underframes and the bogies. Okay, at this stage back into matte coat and fairly dry, not too much varnish on this. I'm just going to brush this over the surface all the way along. So I haven't given the varnish much time to dry, pretty much straight into the brown shades, and what I'm going to do is just flick from the top and you can be as random as you like with this. And then I'm going to go straight into the rust areas. Now I like to pick up all the areas where you've got the body side rust. Give the illusion that that rust has continued to drip down the body sides and onto the bogies. Then just picking out any other little areas which you feel could do a bit more rust. And that's basically it for the undercarriage. Shift the powders out of the way and using that we'll just lock that in, simple as that. So hopefully you got something from the video. If you've got any questions, please do drop them down in the comment section. But I'll be back again soon with another video, so stay tuned. Hopefully sometime next week we'll see something special in time for Christmas, so keep your eyes peeled for that.